little staticky.
Yeah. Well, hello everyone. This is Neal with Graveside Paranormal Presents Spirits by the Graveside. Today's date is 5/15/2022. Tonight, viewer discretion is advised. There is going to be some pictures that are going to be up that you may not want to look at of deaths of children. So be advised that if you know that these pictures are coming up, or if you cannot stand listening to some of the storytelling that's going to happen today, please do not watch, do not listen. So that brings me into our show. Michelle, how are you today?
Hello, everybody. Good, Neil. Thank you. Doing great.
Great. I'm just so all the viewers know, I'm using my phone today. I'm having technical difficulties at home with the internet, so bear with us. I hope the sound is coming through just fine. Like I said, viewer discretion, we are going to be talking about the Peterson-Schuessler murders that happened in 1955. Then we're going to be talking about the Grimes sisters murders that happened in 1956 and bodies were found in 57. And then we are going to get a little bit about Bonnie Lee Scott after the fact in 1958. Now, before we get started, how's everything else going with you, though, Michelle? Because
Not
today's
too
all day.
shabby.
Yeah. So,
Just been busy, 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 getting ready to get out of here, heading to St. Augustine. Looking
yeah.
forward to the lighthouse. So that's my goal. Cross that off the bucket list. Bucket list is long with adventures like that, but finally getting in there at night. I'm so excited. Can't wait.
Yeah,
Can't wait.
I was at St. Augustine. I told you about that. It was the most
Yes.
incredible experience, one of the most incredible experiences I had at a paranormal place. I remember going there, I brought my family in, and the guy said, take pictures, take lots of pictures. And this one young kid, he took a picture at the top of the stair area. And all of a sudden, when he showed it to me, you could see a shadow like figure veering, just leering, looking down at you. And I was like, oh my God, what is that?
Yes.
It
Well,
was,
anything I find, I will definitely make sure to share it with everybody, all you viewers, all of our fans. So stay tuned. Hopefully, I'll catch something spooky dooks down there. And not just the lighthouse, everywhere you go in St. Augustine. There are
yeah.
little haunted sites all over. But beautiful city, great people, great food. Can't wait. It's going to be great.
One of the things is we're going to be getting into the news. But before we get into the news, I would like to tell everybody that it's been a weekend of just nothing but lawn work. So the first thing up on news, actually weird news, but I think you're going to like it. Steve, if you could, please roll the news. All right. In the news, Mr. Marcus Hubbard, the lawnmower man. Now, this is an interesting story because I was mowing my lawn. You see this guy right here? He's mowing his lawn. It's not his lawn. He stole that lawnmower that you see there. But what he did before he tried to steal it, he decided to mow the guy's lawn. So I don't know if you should really charge him with too bad of a crime. He kind of did like a public service for him or something. You know, it was kind of nice, but still at the same time, he did steal the item. That's one of our weird newses of the day. I wish a guy would just at least come by and mow my lawn. That would be very
Right? Yeah.
fine, man, because it was hot yesterday. But
Oh
that's
yeah. Just give him a
yeah,
bottle of water,
give him a bottle of water, maybe a shot of Jack.
There
Never
you
know.
go.
So what do you got for our weird news?
So for my weird news, in Trenton, South Carolina, a 60-year-old man who strangled his girlfriend died of a heart attack while burying her body in their South Carolina backyard, investigators said. Deputies found Joseph Anthony McKinnon's body Saturday after neighbors called and reported an unconscious man in a yard in Trenton. As they investigated McKinnon's death, deputies found a body wrapped in trash bags in a freshly dug hole and determined it was his girlfriend, Patricia Ruth Dent, 65 years old, investigators said. An autopsy on Dent determined she had been strangled, and neighbors told officers they saw McKinnon digging a hole in his yard the day before. An autopsy on McKinnon determined he had died of a heart attack. Deputies said it appeared he was nearly done filling the grave when he set the shovel down, walked away, and collapsed. So, karma, gets you every time.
You know, I mean, ouch. That's bad.
Ouch. Yeah.
That's a bad one there.
Yeah.
But then that takes us into our next thing. Can eyes regenerate after death? Eyes taken from organ donors 5 hours after death responded to light with electrical activity only. Previously seen in the living recorded. The authors of the study said the discovery raises the question of whether brain death, as it is currently defined, is truly irreversible. Lead author Dr. Fatima Abbas of the Moran Eye Center at the University of Utah said, "We are able to wake up the photoreceptor cells in the human macula, which is part of the retina responsible for our central vision and our ability to see fine detail and color." Now, I have to say, that is actually really interesting story, how you're able to, after death, be able to basically turn back on the eyes. And you know what? Could, the eyes, like, could they show like the last thing someone saw before death?
Well, they always say the eyes are the window to the soul, too.
Yeah.
So that's too creepy. Nope, don't want to see that.
You never know. Then our announcements, Steve, if you will. Tragic Tour. Graveside Paranormal presents Tragic Tour. We have 2 tragic tours for the summer. One is May 21st and one is June 18th. They are going to be out of Chicago Ridge. One of the things and what we're going to be talking about tonight is we're going to be talking about the Grimes sisters is on the tour. We're going to take you to Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, take you to the graves of Barbara and Patricia Grimes, and all other things. We're going to also be putting new things out of Showman's Rest and the Frank Nitti murder. Well, suicide, sorry, not murder. Suicide of Frank Nitti is also going to be put on the tour as well. You can go to gravesideparanormal.com and check out and see how you can get tickets off our Eventbrite. Once again, it's May 21st and June 18th at 1 p.m. This is a daytime tour, so come on out for that. Steve, what do we got next? Parapalooza. This is our big event that we do every year. We're going to have Ghostly Podcast out there. Well, Hellbilly Deluxe is going to be out there. They're a cover band for Rob Zombie. Then we should have Absolution out there, which is a group for Ghost. Steve, you got that up there? Yeah, there you go. And then we should have Ghostly Podcast that is going to be out there. We should have Bad Taste Crime Podcast. We're going to have many vendors out there. Oh, Windy City Ghostbusters is going to be out there. They're going to have a 30-foot tall Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. We're going to be doing a raffle with that. We're going to have our vendors. Moonlight Bean is going to be out there. We should have over 30 or 40 vendors. Moonlight Bean is one of them. Voodoo Teak. Frankenworks Jewelry Vintage Arts Studios. And Steve really likes this design, Wicked Whimsy. That is very nicely done. Their art on that is very nicely done. They're going to be out there. It's going to be a day from 12 o'clock all the way to about 11 o'clock at night, 11:30 at night, where there's going to be entertainment all day long. There's also going to be ghost tours throughout the day. There's going to be 3 ghost tours, 2-hour ghost tours. Tony Sabowski, the famous Tony Sabowski, will be doing the ghost tours for you all up and down Archer Avenue. We're going to have a raffles out there. We're going to have a game show that is called Deal with the Devil, which is basically deal or no deal. And Mr. Uncle Bob Trisac is going to be out there, and he's going to for us. Good old Uncle Bob. And Uncle Bob's on the tragic tour with us as well. He's going to be presenting Showman's Rest, which is going to be very, very nice. So we got a lot going on. We got May, June, and July of a lot of things going on, Michelle.
Then a little breather, and then bam, Halloween season.
And it's Halloween season. We're already lining up things with that. We're talking about the Raw Files, getting you in there on Halloween weekend.
That's right.
Investigations, you're going to be doing that. All right, so this is going to lead me into our guest, Mr. Haunt Detective, Ray Johnson. Ray, come on in.
Hey, there I am.
How are you?
Ray,
Good,
hello,
good.
Ray.
How are you guys doing?
Good.
Very good.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, just want to make sure because I was having just a second. Because once again, I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. We're having a little bit of a technical issue earlier of it. Ray Johnson is the Haunt Detective. Ray, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to what you're doing right now?
Well, I was originally, if you go all the way back from the military days, but what I did shortly before I started doing what I'm doing now, I was a criminal investigator with the West Chicago Police Department in DuPage County. So it's mainly gang narcotics for most of the career. It was 3 years patrol, and then went into the gang narcotics unit. And then, there's been a couple things I've always been interested in. I've always been interested in ghost stories, and I've always been interested in history. And I always tell someone you can't have a ghost story unless someone's history. So they kind of go together. And then so one of my goals was to always write a book, but I didn't want to write, being a cop, every cop says they want to write a book, and then it's usually about cop stuff. And I didn't want to do that. So I had contacted a publisher just by chance. I was looking through a history book in the bookstore, and a bookmark had fallen out of the book, and it said, "Have you ever wanted to write a book?" And I said, "Oh, this is a sign, right?" So I sent him this idea about doing a study of Chicago ghost stories and urban legends from the standpoint of an investigator. So not necessarily to disprove or prove that any of the stuff is real or not, but just to say, how did it start? Where did it come from? How did it change? How much of the story is based on fact, and how much is fiction? So I didn't think they were going to do anything with it. And then all of a sudden they contacted me and said, "Yeah, we like the idea." And so they came up with the idea of Chicago's Haunt Detective. And they wanted all the stories to have something to do with the police. So have some kind of link to law enforcement. And so, of course, I knew about the Grimes murders. Like I think every cop that works in and around Chicago has heard of, the Schuessler-Peterson case, the Grimes sisters and Judith May Anderson, and some of the more prevalent child murders that happened in a very short period of time in Chicago. It was a really bad time to be a teenager in Chicago during those years. But so originally it was to look at the Grimes case from the standpoint of what ghost stories were associated with it, and then kind of bringing in the criminal part of it. And as I was doing the research for it, because like cold cases aren't usually my thing. I mean, once I left police work, I was like, I tell people I'm retired and haven't had a relapse since then. But this case kind of stuck with me because as I was doing the research for the book, I started digging in. Certain things didn't make any sense. And I'm like, wait a second. And then the more I dug into it, the more stuff started coming out of it, and I was like, wait a second, has this guy ever been looked at? And then one thing led to another, and I contacted the cold case group in Chicago and Cook County, and it was kind of funny. I had just left a message for the guys. The cold case group weren't in the office at the time, so I talked to their secretary. And the only message I left was, hey, I'm a retired cop, and I might have some information about an old cold case that might interest you. Here's my number. Give me a call back. And that's all I said on this message. And the guy calls me back, and he said, yeah, there's Ray Johnson there. I said, yeah, this is he. And he said, I think I know what case you're talking about. And I said, I didn't tell you what case I was talking about. And he said, the Grimes case. And I'm like, how the heck would you know that? And he's like, it might have been the tone of voice, or something like that. But it's kind of like, like, I don't want to sound weird, being that at the time it was about 56 years old. And I'm thinking, what do I know? I mean, this is probably stuff they've gone over a million times already. But I thought it was important to kind of let them know, because the person was still alive. And so I went down there, talked with them. And anyway, so that's one of the stories in the book, Chicago's Haunt Detective. But then as time went on, even after that, I started publishing blogs on the topic, just to I met the family, just, they actually requested to meet with me, because as I'm writing about it on my blog, they were kind of like, why are you so interested in this? And, and so we met at a bar and we talked for a while and got to meet them. And so it's kind of, we've come across a lot of new information that, people coming forward, people saying things on their deathbed, other people that we've interviewed with information about the case, who've since died during the pandemic, but we have everything kind of saved. So it's been interesting. So, and we can get into that. I know you want to talk about Schuessler Peterson first, but that's how I got kind of involved in the Grimes sisters case.
Well, let me ask you this, because I always ask this question when I get someone new on. Have you ever had anything paranormal ever happen to you?
Absolutely.
And,
okay. It was, I've had some pretty scary stuff happen to me. So most of it was when I was growing up in Cicero. And I think that's why I'm interested in ghost stories, because I've had those sort of experiences. I can't tell you what it was, but I know that I had seen physical, things where I'll give you two instances. One, I was probably, this all happened between the ages of 13 and 15, kind of in that range. And I remember I wake up in the middle of the night, wide awake. And it was, and I was kind of mad because I, had to get up early for school the next day. And I look at the time and it was 3:15, and I'm like, oh, 3:15. Well, at least I got a couple hours before, and I went back to sleep. Next day, same thing, 3:15, wide awake for whatever reason.
Right.
It was on for 3 or 4 days. And I'm like, okay, this is just weird. And then it finally happened on the 5th day, I think it was a Friday. And all of a sudden I wake up and I'm like, I'm not going to look at the clock. Not going to look at the clock because it's going to freak me out. I'm not going to look at the clock. Okay, I'll look at the clock. And I looked, and of course it was 3:15. I'm like, oh no. And then for some reason I'm looking at my bedroom door, and it was kind of funny. I shared a bedroom with my brothers, and my mom was a really smart lady, and she didn't want 3 boys in a room with a door. So she took the door off the hinges and never came back. So we never had a door. It was just an opening, and so I remember looking at this opening, and I couldn't take my eyes away from it. I wanted to go back to bed, but every time I tried to, I'd wake up and look at this doorway. So I'm staring at this doorway, and then all of a sudden I see this kind of see-through white kind of figure in the silhouette of a human being, but I couldn't make out any features. And it was just slowly moving across the doorway. And of course I did whatever, every brave 13-year-old boy would do. You put your head under the covers and start shaking uncontrollably.
Yeah.
So the covers went up and I'm shaking. And then I thought, well, if this thing's going to hurt me, I can't just be sitting here waiting to die, So I said, I'm just going to, no matter what happens, I'm going to throw the covers off. I'm going to run straight at whatever this thing is. And so I throw the covers off, and there it is, perfectly centered in the doorway. And I run right into it. And so as I kind of touch it, it really was kind of strange, because as it looked as though I was going to hit it, it's like all of a sudden I felt like everything slowed down, and I felt like, with the old TV screens, when you touch the TV screen, it'd all be all like staticky, right after you turned it off. That's kind of what everything felt like, and I was like slowly moving through it, like my forward motion had been slowed, almost like I was going through some sort of a jello or something, and then I came out the other end and it was gone.
Wow.
Weird.
Yeah, and I was like, that's freaky. So I run, tell my parents. Of course, they told me I was crazy to go back.
You were
to bed.
slimed. You were slimed.
What's that?
You were slimed.
Yeah, and then the second thing that happened was, well, there's actually a third thing, and I don't know how long your podcast is, but the second thing was I'm sitting there. We had these guys that lived upstairs. They rented rooms and helped my dad pay the mortgage. And so these guys lived there before he bought the house, and he didn't want to throw them out. So there's these guys that rented rooms on the second floor of our house. And every once in a while, one of them would come down, knock on the back door, and hand me a check or something, say, hey, give this to your dad for the rent. And we're like, okay. And so I'm sitting there in my bedroom watching TV. I'm by myself. My parents are in the living room. And all of a sudden I hear the knock, on the back door. Oh, I'm going to make my dog bark. And so I just kind of, walk around out my bedroom door, around the fridge to the back door, because there's stairs that go down from there into the basement, and there's stairs that go up to the second floor. And I unlock the door, I open it, and there's nobody there. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. I said, maybe I was hearing things or whatever. So I close the door, I lock it, I go back to the bedroom, I'm watching TV, all of a sudden, same knock, bang, bang, bang. I'm like, okay, now I'm not going crazy. So I get up and I walk around the fridge, I open up, there's nobody there. And I said, okay, that's really weird. So I lock it, I go back to the bedroom, all of a sudden it knocks. And I'm like, okay, that's one of my friends, they're playing a joke on me or whatever. So I sneak as quietly as I can to the door. I'm waiting to catch one of my friends. And so I put my hand on the lock, and I put my other hand on the doorknob, and I wait for the knock. And this time I hear it and feel it on the door, and I'm like, they're so busted. And so I hit the lock, open it, and there's nothing there. And I'm like, oh, so I slam it. Now I'm terrified. I lock it. I go back to the bedroom, same knock. I'm like, I'm not answering the door. And it knocks. And then it got louder and louder to the point where it sounded like someone was trying to bust in the door using their shoulder. Really? And so I freaked out, and I ran out of my bedroom and was going toward the living room to kind of tell my parents, hey, someone's trying to break into the house. And as I cleared my bedroom door, this big picture window that we had in the kitchen exploded into the kitchen, all, showering me with glass.
Wow.
And then my parents came running out, and they said, what happened? I said, I don't know. Someone was trying to get in the back door, and they called the police, and the police showed up, and they're like, yeah, we have no idea, what just happened. So
that's crazy, man.
Wow.
Yeah. That is really nuts.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, everyone is like, they always ask me if I'm doing talks on stuff that's ghostly. They're always like, do you believe in ghosts? I said, well, it depends on what you mean by that. I said, I've had some really weird experiences that I can't explain, and I could share them with you. So does that mean it's a ghost? I don't know. It's whatever it is. So
yeah, it's hard to determine because when we do investigations and stuff like that, you have to wait till you go through all the evidence to really determine certain things, and we have to. It's a tireless thing going through all the evidence. It really is, especially when you're recording everything. Mm-hmm. But let's get into the subject at hand. First thing we're going to talk about is the Peterson-Schuessler murders. Peterson-Schuessler's murder of 1955. On October 16, 1955, John Schuessler, 13, his brother Anton, 11, and a friend Robert Peterson, 14, has been missing for 2 days. On Sunday, the trio had taken a bus downtown for a matinee screening of Walt Disney's The African Lion. I remember that movie. Followed by some bowling afterwards. On Tuesday, October 8th, 1955, a salesman took a closer look at the forms that had been dumped in a ditch near the Forest Reserve near Robinson Woods, near Chicago. There were 3 boys stripped of their clothes, all dead. Ray, please tell us in detail what you know of this story.
Okay, so Schuessler-Peterson case was probably the first in a number of cases that would be close together that happened in Chicago in the 50s. But this was the one that kind of started it all. I mean, not that there weren't murders in Chicago before this, but they were more for lack of a better word, typical run-of-the-mill type of murders, unless you're talking about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre or something like that. But this was a major thing, and it hit home with people because it involved kids. It involved 3 kids. And so between this and the Grimes case, I think if I'm giving talks on either one of them, this was the time where parents required the kids to come home when the streetlights went on. Previous to that, Richard Lindbergh, I believe, wrote a book on just the Schuessler-Peterson case, and I believe it was called The End of Innocence or whatnot, because that's really or Innocence Lost, I can't remember, something like that. But it really was when kids were introduced to like horrific things, and it was, before it was like everyone knew each other in the neighborhood. You go out playing, you hang out here, you hang out there. You pretty much had freedom. And then it was after the Schuessler-Peterson case that parents were just watching their kids like a hawk, because nobody knew at the time who could have done this.
It wasn't like a gangland style, like you're getting like Valentine's thing.
No,
this was a thing that just totally was horrific.
Well, it just shocked. It was shocking. It was shocking. We weren't used to this type of thing. It didn't happen every day. And as far as I know, there were no other triple child murders prior to this in Chicago. I suppose if I dug, hard enough, I could find one, but I don't think that one like this existed. So, and it was terrifying because, depending on what you believe as far as who committed the crime, I know technically someone was convicted of it. I have my own thoughts on that, but that wasn't until 1992. That this person's name even came up. So, Ken Hansen. So that was, 30 some odd years that nobody knew what happened with these boys. So,
So supposedly, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that the boys went out, like I said in the beginning, went to go see African Lion, went to the bowling thing, and Mr. Kenneth Hansen, at about the age of 22 years of age, because the kids were trying to hitchhike home, I was told.
Right.
And
supposedly, we don't know if anyone, we don't know who picked them up. It was just kind of conjectured that they were hitchhiking. Because it was common, during that time frame for kids to hitchhike or catch rides with people they didn't know. It was, especially if they were out of money, because supposedly they only left with about $4 between all of them. So it wasn't a whole lot of money for them to get take a bus downtown, see the show, and buy some popcorn or whatever, and then have just enough money to make it back. So if they bought too much popcorn or candy at the show, they'd be a little short of cash and would find themselves hitching a ride on the way back. So,
and I think we've all been there. I know.
Yeah, it's really easy to spend that money. So
it is, too many whatchamacallits, and then next thing you know. So moving on. Now, like I said, this is a very horrific thing, and it's unbelievable. So Mr. Kenneth Hansen supposedly lured these 3 boys to Mr. Silas Jane's horse stables, where he had 2 of the older boys. Now, once again, please let everybody know the things I'm going to be telling next. Please just listen if you want to. If you don't want to, please don't. What happened was the 2 older boys, the Peterson, who was the oldest, he was 14 years of age, and then Anton's brother,
John.
They went to go look at some of the horses. And that's when Mr. Kenneth Hansen started to try to molest the younger brother, Anton Jr. After that fact, he then wanted to switch off the boys and try to lure the next one in, but he originally tried to talk them into doing sexual acts by giving them money. Am I correct on that?
That was all the information regarding Ken Hansen came from an ATF informant. So there was nothing that physically linked Hansen to the boys' murder. The only thing they really had was an informant's statement that this is what Hansen told this person in prison when they were locked up. I think Hansen was doing some time for arson, and then supposedly had said something to this guy. And it came about really when ATF was investigating the disappearance of Helen Brock. So, and that's why the Silas Jane connection kind of makes it, because Silas Jane had sold a bogus horse to Helen Brock, and Helen Brock found out about it, didn't like it too much, and was about to go to the police and Silas did this to a number of different, people. He just ripped off rich people saying, "Hey, I've got this thoroughbred horse." It ends up being ready for the glue factory or whatever, and charges them a ton of money. But normally would have something to blackmail some of these people with, so they never went to the authorities. But Helen Brock didn't have anything to be blackmailed for, so they still don't know technically who was responsible for Helen Brock. So I don't think that's ever been proven either. So that's how Silas Jane's name comes into it, because everyone assumed it was Jane, which is probably true, or one of Jane's henchmen, or someone that he would hire to take care of it. Is probably what happened to Helen Brock. But it was Ken Hansen who worked as a stable hand for Silas Jane, who supposedly made these statements to a jail cellmate while he was locked up.
Well, after the supposed molestation of one or two of the boys, then after he said one by one, he killed one of them one by one, which I find kind of hard to believe, because when they're pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to be fast at one time,
Yep.
a long time ago. And I find it kind of hard, but they said that Mr. Silas Jane had knowingly knew what happened that day. And then after the murder and these kids were strangulated, and after Anton was molested, Bobby Peterson received 14 slashes to the top of his forehead. And then after the bodies were thrown into the ditch, and a salesman a couple of days later found these things, which he, like the Grimes sisters, thought was mannequins.
Mm-hmm.
They were naked. No clothes were on these children. I want everybody who are listening to keep that in mind. No clothes were on these children whatsoever. No clothes were ever found of these children, at least that I know of. Mm-hmm. And after the fact of this happened, for whatever reason, Silas Jane's stables burnt down. Do you know about that?
Yes. So it was in May of the following year. So the boys went missing on 16 October. Their bodies were found on 18 October. One of Silas Jane's stables was burned down the following year, May. So that's why the assumption was made that the stables burned down because they were trying to hide some sort of evidence. Now I find it hard to believe that. In my opinion, I know how bloodthirsty Silas Jane was. He had his brother killed, and that's the only thing he technically didn't. He technically did. I think he was charged with conspiracy in his brother's murder. But his brother ticked him off. Now, I know that if Silas found out that Ken Hansen was abusing young children in one of his stables and actually murdered them in one of his stables, I don't think Ken Hansen would be with us anymore. I think that possibly the stables would burn down, but I don't think he would have let Hansen continue to do what he was doing. And if you look at Hansen, he had a long history of sexually molesting young boys.
Right.
Some estimates have been over 100 that he had done over the years. Now, as far as we know, he didn't kill any of them. And the way some of these boys were murdered, it didn't appear to me, because, that I've heard the conjecture that, once one knew that one was being abused, one tried to stop it, and then he had to kill him because they would talk or whatever. But the abuse that went into the sadistic abuse that went into these kids was more, I think, than just out of necessity. It wasn't a murder out of necessity. It was a sadist who actually did this. I mean, their eyes were taped, their mouths were taped. All three of them were strangled and beaten. both before and after death. So not only were they beaten before they were dead, but they were beaten after they were dead. So this is someone who really enjoyed what they were doing and probably had gone on, if not stopped, to do more. So that's kind of my take on it.
Like Kenneth Hansen was actually in the Marine Corps, and his brother Kurt is said that he helped get rid of the bodies. That one ATF informant that you're talking about, I'm not going to say names, is that he knew them, where he would actually have drinks with these people. And supposedly when Kenneth would get drunk, he would start to talk about that. And then Kurt, the older brother, I believe he's the older brother, used to say that his brother was very good at hurting people. If I remember right from what I remember.
Yeah, Kurt was actually more of a, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Ken Hansen was a great guy. I mean, he was a homosexual pedophile. But Kurt was more of the more violent of the two, the sicker of the two. Okay. So, and there was, according to the autopsy, it was a coroner at the time, but the doctors that were doing the autopsy, who were the same doctors that did the autopsies on the Grimes sisters, said that there had to have been more than one person involved.
Yeah, there had to have been more than one person. That 3 young boys. No, it's impossible. Even if you're 22 years old, you grab one, the other one's going to run. To me personally, I don't think that's going to happen like that. It just doesn't make any sense. One of the very sad things that's about this story, other than the deaths, of course, is Anton Sr. Anton Sr. was actually a suspect. And he died 1 month later from all probably the mental, physical, emotional heartache. He died of a heart attack 1 year later. I mean, how dare people in life do these things to children? See, they don't really understand because they don't have empathy, where you're actually destroying a lot of other lives as you move along and do the actions that you do.
Yeah.
So Mr. Anton, 1 month later.
Well, he was actually going through electroshock therapy.
Right. I was going to ask that question. Yeah. Wasn't he taken to a mental institution, given electrode, and died? No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think it was called the Forest Sanitarium in Des Plaines.
Right.
And it was, if I remember correctly, I thought it was court ordered because he was acting really strange. And they court ordered him to have electroshock therapy. And it was during, they believe that, other than a broken heart and the stress involved in losing 2 kids, coupled with the electroshock therapy and who knows what else was going on, physically with him, pretty much culminated in killing him.
I think he died later that day, too.
Yeah, November. And
he was
11th.
Only about 42 years old.
Yeah, November 11th. So the kids were killed. Well, as far as I know, they said the kids more than likely died within. Well, the problem is they couldn't really pinpoint it exactly. They said that they're pretty sure the kids died sometime between the last time someone supposedly saw them close to 9 o'clock at a bus stop and about midnight. So they're kind of they originally thought that they had gone to a restaurant called the CNL restaurant, and one of the waitresses said she remembered them, and they ordered these huge meals. And she was even wondering if they'd have enough money to pay for them. They would have spent more money at that restaurant than they would have spent, at the theater and bus fare. But when the autopsy came forward, their stomachs only had 2 of them had chicken soup in their stomachs, which they didn't have at home. So they had to have had it somewhere. And one of them had nothing in his stomach. I think it was Peterson didn't have anything. The two kids, the younger ones, John and his brother Anton, had chicken soup in their stomachs.
So Ray, you don't think that Kenneth Hansen was the only one who supposedly killed these young boys?
No, No, I don't think, I personally, I don't think it was Ken Hansen at all. So I came across an article that was sent to me, because people send me stuff all the time, and I'd never seen this article before. And it was written in 1989. So this is 3 years before Ken Hansen's name even comes into the picture at all from the informants. And it usually blows people away when I say this, because we're all familiar with this person. And the more you read this article, I mean, I've got a copy of it. I don't know if I sent that to you. I'll send it to you. It's really a good read. It was in the Chicago Magazine in 1989. And the officer who was one of the original officers on the Schuessler-Peterson case, he was one of the 50 officers who were handpicked to be part of the major crimes group that was investigating the case, believed it was John Wayne Gacy.
Right.
These were more than likely his first or one of his very first victims.
Wow.
And there's so much to it. So, I mean, the more and more I read this article, I was like, okay, this is not coincidence. I mean, I know, once you're a cop, you stop believing in coincidences. And while, yes, Jane had a number of horse stables, and there was one within about a half mile of where the boys were found at Robinson Woods. So there's that. But there was also, they had stables down south that weren't too far from where the Grimes sisters were found. So, and they also had stables in a million other places. So, I mean, they had so many of these stables that you could pretty much pin them to every murder that happened in Chicago if you wanted to. But it was funny. This officer in 1979 was looking back over. His name was Sarnowski, and he was looking back over his case. Actually, his wife was looking over all of his old case files because she was going to compile a scrapbook, maybe write a book, again, the cop writing a book thing about all the cases that he had investigated. So his wife was looking through stuff, and she came across a sketch that was done by a police sketch artist. And she looked at the sketch, and then she looked, and it was right around the time, that the whole Gacy thing was coming out. And she looked at the sketch and she started showing it to people, and people who actually knew Gacy, and they said, yeah, that looks like Gacy when he was about 15.
Well, yeah, now that I think about it, I mean, he dressed up like a clown. Maybe that's where his clown stuff started, because kids would like to see a clown. Hey, there's a clown.
They go into
entice the kids.
Well,
wow.
Well, what happened was that he went and revisited the mother of the boys, Dorothy Peterson, the mother of Robert Peterson. And so the cop went back to her just, to kind of revisit the whole thing and see if they could find a link between Gacy and whatnot. And this is kind of where the sketch came from, because he had gone back to Dorothy and said, had saw Peterson's little sister, and she was wearing glasses. And the cop said, oh, I've got eye problems too. Where does your little girl go to the eye doctor at? And she goes, oh, there's an office. Her name is Gonzalez. It's in the Garland building downtown. And he said, and she goes, Robert used to take her there all the time. And he said, just on a lark, he said, well, we're going to go talk to the eye doctor. So they go to the office, and for some reason, they went to the Garlic building, which is on Wabash, which was also a known homosexual hangout at the time. There were places in the Garland building other than doctors' offices. And so they said, what would be the odds that they asked when was the last time Robert was there, and they said, oh, it was like October 12th or something like that, 4 days before he disappeared. And so they went back to the office, and this was 20 months after the fact. And so they went back to the Garland building. They said, by any chance, do you have the logins for the 16th? And which is the day that the boys went missing. And they said, oh, it's probably gone. We only hang on to those for a week. They find it. For some reason, this thing still exists. And guess whose name is on the register? Robert Peterson. So the parents didn't even know that Robert Peterson was there. And this would have been 3 hours after they left home. It was 6 p.m. And so when they talked to the eye doctor, they said, do you remember Robert Peterson? They said, oh yeah, he used to come here all the time. And he said, but he always used to have this kid with him that, and she knew the other kids, Anton, because they were friends too. But she said he used to always bring this other guy with. And she said he had this real puffy face. He was about 5'8", 160-pound, broad shoulders, walked with a limp, and was kind of like she said the kid reminded me of Mr. Potato Head.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the way that the Gacy investigators referred to Gacy when they were doing his background or whatever. So it was like Mr. Potato Head. And so they started putting this thing out there, and it was that Gacy hung out at the same candy store where the Schuessler Peterson boys hung out at. And he also hung out at the Monte Cristo bowling alley, which is where they were seen that night. And Peterson was choked using a rope tourniquet, knotted rope tourniquet. And they said was Gacy's kind of trademark. And he learned how to tie those knots in the Boy Scouts because he was in the Boy Scouts as well.
Wow.
So I mean, it just went on and on. There's so many other coincidences in that that you wouldn't believe. And he was a strong kid. They were interviewing some guy that had a throwdown with him, and this guy was like he was like 18 or 19 when Gacy was 14. And he said they were playing cards, and Gacy had a couple really bad hands, and this guy was laughing at him because he was losing so much. And Gacy grabbed him by the throat and threw him to the ground. Before he knew it, he said, I was on the ground and couldn't breathe. And he said this kid was monstrously strong.
Wow.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah, there were so many things in this. I'll send you the article. Well, after I read that, I was like, there's no way that Gacy didn't do this, And then they said that his father may have been involved. Now, so they put together this whole conjecture, kind of like with the Ken Hansen thing, where they said this is more than likely what happened. They think that Gacy was grooming Peterson, and that Peterson went along with things willingly originally, and that Anton and the other kid were in Gacy's house at the time, and Gacy had taken Peterson to the garage, and that's where he had him, put the rope around his neck willingly, saying that it would, it would make the, not to be gross or anything, but make the orgasm more intense. And so they think that he took care of the older guy, but then he managed to get out of it, and Gacy grabbed a hoe, which they said, the autopsy said it was kind of a rake hoe garden implement, and just, beat him with that for a while. And then eventually grabbed the other two kids, which they said were probably eating chicken soup in Gacy's kitchen. And then eventually brought them, one at a time to the garage, saying, hey, we're going to play a game or whatever, and would kill them and get rid of them. And then they believed that the father, they said Gacy would have been strong enough to throw all three kids into the trunk of the car. They said one of the kids had the imprints of a Packard, 1950s Packard trunk mat in the imprintation of one of their backs. So whoever, the bottom kid, whoever went in first, was leaning up against the mat. Now also Ken Hansen, I think Silas Jane also had a Packard vehicle. So that really doesn't, prove one way or the other. But
wasn't that a fancy car back in the day? So somebody with money.
It was. And it was new. I mean, there was
right.
New cars for the time. There were 54, 55 Packards. So, I mean, it's like having a new car. So, yeah, you had to have a little bit of money. It was fascinating.
Yeah, what you just told me is totally that's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that you say it, man, it does make sense.
Now I want to look into that more.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, like I said, I'll email you the article. Just read it. By the time you're done with it, you'll be like, holy crap. That's exactly what happened. Right. So that's it's not as though, it's because of something I uncovered. It was just something that someone had sent me, this article that I knew nothing about. And it was 3 years before Hansen's name even came up. Now, the guy went to his superiors. They actually started when the Schuessler Peterson kids turned up. They immediately started going into different areas of the city, different homosexual bars or whatever, because they really didn't distinguish between homosexuals and pedophiles. They kind of grouped them all into one type of thing. So a bunch of people were brought in and interviewed, and they cleared out a bar on the north side, and one of the kids, well, the only teenager that was in there was John Wayne Gacy, and so they had him there. They took down his name and everything, but then when Sarnowski went to his superiors and said, hey, this is the thought I had, and they said no one would ever believe that a 14, 15-year-old could do something like that, so they told him to drop it. So they did try to bring him up as a suspect, but the guy's superior said no one will ever buy that a 14 or 15-year-old could do this.
That's crazy. Wow. It's a sad story. It really is. And that's going to lead us into another very, very sad story. Just so that everybody knows, the next story we're going to talk about is the Grimes sisters. Actually, I learned about this story from Ray, and we didn't know is that, as that people know, I've been doing the ghost tours now for about 7 or 8 years. And I try to find other kinds of stories other than just paranormal. And we talk about the Grimes sisters on our tours, as well as Miracle Child, Mary Alice Quinn. So it was almost 66 years ago, the Grimes sisters' tragic murder began when Barbara, 15, and Patricia, 13, Grimes went out into the night on December 28, 1950, the Brighton movie theater for a late-night showing of Love Me Tender, starring Elvis Presley. In 1956, who was the most popular man? Elvis the Pelvis.
That's right.
Oh, that's right. Both girls were never to return home again on that tragic night. Ray, please take this story only up to the findings of the body by Larry Prescott on German Church Road.
All right, I'll stop there. All right, so going back, you kind of covered it. Barbara Grimes was 15. Patricia, who was known as Petey to her family and friends, she was 13. Petey was in grade school at St. Maurice Catholic School. Barbara was a sophomore at Kelly High School. And it was, shortly after Christmas. The girls, like I said, were big Elvis fans. I think every 13, 15 to 17-year-old girl was headed to the Brighton Theater to see Love Me Tender. And, the girls ate dinner at home that night. Their sister Teresa was working. Their sister Shirley, older sister Shirley, lived upstairs from them. They did have an older sister, older than Shirley, but she passed away from natural causes. Leona Freck was her name. She was married before, and Jimmy and Joey weren't home. So it was just the mom and 2 girls actually having dinner that night. And the girls had gotten home late the night before. They were kind of in trouble. The mom was still kind of ticked off at them, and told them they couldn't go to the show. And so as they were eating, Barbara kind of buttered mom up and said, please, mom, let us go, blah, blah, blah. And the mom finally said, okay, fine, you can go. So it was about 7:15. They had, I believe, according to the mom, they had about $1.25 between the 2 of them. Barbara worked. She worked at the Wolf Furniture Store, and she would give her money to the mom because she was a single mom. She had been separated from her husband, Joe Grimes, for about 11 years. And so she was raising all these kids by herself. And so the girls, would give their money to mom and help support the family. And so the mom gave them the money. They left. She assumed they were going to take the bus there and the bus back. That was the plan. We don't know if they took the bus to the show. We do know that they were at the show, so they didn't make it to the Brighton Theater. There's Dorothy Weinert, who was a real close friend of theirs, who they sat at least close to, somewhat next to in the same row in the movie theater. There was some indication that through people before we talked to people that started coming forward, there were differing accounts about when the girls left the theater that night. So Dorothy Weinert, who's their friend, had left because a lot of these kids had gotten there at, halfway through the show. So they would have to sit through the next movie and then watch the first half as it played again. So there were 2 movies that played at the theater, Love Me Tender, and the other movie was called The Opposite Sex. So the girls got there late. They only caught the back end of the first showing of the Elvis movie, and so they wanted to see the rest of it. So they saw the end first, and then they stayed to see the first half, and then people just assume that, okay, they only stayed long enough till they got to the point where they already saw when they came in the first time. But no, they they're Elvis fans. They're not going to leave early, so they were going to watch it again the full time. And Dorothy remembers Petey was kind of laughing at Barbara because Barbara was crying, at the end of the movie, and she remembers Petey giving Barbara a hard time for crying, and Petey being the younger one, Barbara being the older one. And so originally, Roger Menard was a guy who, in my opinion, was kind of he wanted to do good. He wanted to help, and so he didn't know the girls personally, but he seems to remember the conversation that Dorothy Weinert mentioned during the coroner's inquest. So he assumed he based on the conversation he was hearing from the people in front of him, he could assume that the two girls sitting almost in front of him were the Grimes sisters. And so he did leave early. And as he was walking out of the theater, he testified that the Grimes girls walked out after him and were behind him about 100 feet or so. Of course, we're talking late at night, someone you don't really know. You didn't see them with their jackets on inside the theater. Now they're wearing jackets, but yet you know who they are 100 feet behind you in the middle of the night while you're walking down Archer Avenue. So, but what he did say was kind of interesting. He said there were two cars that tried to pick up, regardless if these girls were the Grimes sisters or not, there were two girls walking behind him. And he mentions two cars that tried to pick them up, one after the other. One was a black 49 Mercury, and the other one was a blue 55 Buick hardtop special. And so Roger Menard knew his cars. And so he said the first one pulled up, tried to pick him up. They just kind of laughed the person off. The car took off. Second car pulled up, same situation. And they were kind of running in tandem. He said it was obviously the drivers of the two cars knew each other. And then he said that when they got to about California, I think it was, and Archer is where he veered off to the north, and he said the girls continued to walk down Archer Avenue. He assumed in the direction of where they lived. So that was his testimony. And then what happened is that the girls didn't come home, and the mom started worrying. Obviously, actually, the sister Teresa and the younger brother, one of the younger brothers, Joey, the mom had sent them to the bus stop at 35th and Archer, which is where they should have gotten off the bus. And they said they went there, they waited, bus came, left, no Barbara Patricia. Next bus came, no Barbara Patricia. Eventually they're like, something's wrong. And on the way back to the house, Joey actually stopped a police officer on the street and said, hey, my two sisters didn't come home from the movie. And the officer kind of blew him off like, oh, they're out with their boyfriends. Don't worry about it. They're probably out having fun. So they get home. They had never run away before. They weren't troublemakers. When Teresa and Joey got back home, they talked to the mother. The mother was calling friends, neighbors, going down the street, knocking on doors, trying to find out if anyone had seen the girls. Nobody had seen them. So it was about 2 a.m. when she went to the police station herself and filed the report. And the police initially were like, hey, they're young girls. It's an Elvis Presley movie. They're probably out with their boyfriends. Don't worry, they'll come home. After about a week, they started taking it more seriously. And it still really didn't make the news up until the point that Elvis Presley found out that two girls were missing that went to go see Love Me Tender. And he actually made a statement that he asked the girls, if you guys are good Elvis Presley girls or good Elvis Presley fans, you'll go home to your mother. Right. And so then it became national news once Elvis started, making a comment on it. Initially, nobody wanted the case. It was sort of like, one of these things like, oh, no, another couple of missing girls. Because it did happen quite a bit that girls kind of went missing. And then it wasn't until January 28th when Leonard Prescott, who was a truck driver who lived in Hinsdale at the time, was driving eastbound down German Church Road, and he said he was on the way to go to the store, and he said he looked over to his left, and he saw what he referred to as a couple store mannequins, which is kind of funny because that's exactly how the salesperson who found the Schuessler Peterson boys referred to them, looking like mannequins. And oh, there go the dogs. Hold on 1 second, just 1 second. You're not going to be able to.
That dog a Scooby track. Oh boy. Always something at Graveside Paranormal.
Yeah.
How about them White Sox?
She needs something to drink.
Woohoo! Let's go White Sox.
All right, I'm back. All right. We're back. So he said he thought what he looked at. Now he did something I thought was kind of strange, but sometimes you got to look at it with a grain of salt. So he said that. Well, he said he originally thought they were mannequins, and then he thought, I'm going to go pick up my wife, because if they are bodies, I don't want to be the only one to find them. Right. Because right away he would, who do you look at first? The person that found the bodies. So you got to, so he went back to get his wife. Took his wife back there, confirmed, no, they're not mannequins. They're actually, deceased females, no clothes, left the same way as the Schuessler Peterson boys. Went to the Willow Springs Police Department, reported it. They sent a guy out to take a look. Once they saw it was the bodies of two girls, obviously everyone had the Grimes sisters on their mind at that point, so they contacted Chicago. And Chicago shot out there. Harry Gloss, who was the coroner at the time, he shot out there. And of course, the Cook County sheriffs had to send their deputies because the area where the girls were found was unincorporated. So it initially started as a Chicago investigation, but as you know, Neal, once the body's found, that's kind of where that's the lead investigative unit is where the bodies are found. So now you've got. And then that starts a whole issue, because now you have two different departments working on the same case. And while nobody wanted the case when it first started, now that it was national news, everyone kind of wanted to get their hand in it because everyone wanted to be the one to solve the crime. So you had that, jurisdictional thing that kind of, messed things up a bit.
Yeah, so there was like a lot of attention now, even though there wasn't a lot of attention for at least the first almost couple of weeks. They just blew Miss Loretta Grimes off, whatever.
Right.
And what's odd about that is, Patricia, I believe it was Patricia, had her birthday 3 days later, so she already had everything all planned out. Why would children run off, No,
they didn't even take anything. They left all their gifts. The mother even said they didn't run away. Why would they leave all their gifts? They left their,
radios.
The radio, the AM radio they had was like their prized possession at that point. They wouldn't leave home without that. So, and they didn't take any clothes, or they didn't take, if they were planning on leaving, they would have taken a little something with them before they left. And so that didn't pan out.
So Ray, a coroner's report finally ruled that the Grimes sisters froze to death that night. They disappeared less than 20 hours. But the coroner's chief investigator, Harry Gloss, believes a different scenario. Can you tell us a little bit about Harry Gloss and his scenario?
So Harry Gloss was also the investigator for Schuessler Peterson. So he was the coroner's office had their own investigators, and Harry Gloss was the coroner's investigator. So he was a cop, basically. He wasn't a doctor, but he did work for the coroner's office. So there were so many different theories going around about what happened to the girls, because, unlike the Schuessler Petersons, they were found, within 2 days of them going missing. So there wasn't a lot of length of time between when the boys went missing and when their bodies were found. So, no brainer. They died sometime between October 16th when they were last seen alive and October 18th when they found their bodies in a ditch in Robertson Woods. With the Grimes girls, they disappeared December 28th and were found, almost a month later. It was January 21st. Did I say 28th last time? It was January 21st when they were found. So some of the issues were like, well, how did nobody see the bodies, for a month? Now one theory out there is that they were killed somewhere and then kept in a freezer. There were some theories that that was one of the first theories, because they're like, well, they of course the autopsy hadn't been done yet, so they weren't really sure how they died. They weren't shot, they weren't stabbed, they weren't strangled. There were only a few signs or marks on the body. Very few. Most of the marks were done by rodents or other animals.
Right.
That were done, post-mortem after they had died. There were 3 marks on Patricia Petey's chest. So to give you, some background of how the bodies were found, you had Barbara, who was face down, kind of laying on her side on the bottom, and you had Petey that was perpendicular face up over the top of Barbara. So they were kind of laid in a cross kind of pattern, So you had Barbara laying face down, Petey face up on top, laid crosswise. And there were 3 puncture wounds on Patricia's chest, and they were in a triangular shape, and they're very almost perfectly spaced, almost like it was, something like a rake or a hoe or one of these 3-pronged garden tools. Initially they said they were similar to a puncture from an ice pick, but they weren't deep enough to cause death. They're only about a ½ inch deep. So that kind of confused people, but and they were made post-mortem, so they weren't stab marks before, because there was no bruising. So obviously there was no circulation going on at the time those puncture marks were made, because there was no bruising, around the marks. So they know it was done post-mortem. So, but there were no indications as to how they died. So actually, on their death certificate, it says homicide. But it said they didn't say how. They said the cause of death was homicide with secondary trauma due to low temperature. So in other words, they froze to death, which I can kind of understand based on how I think it kind of went down, but based on what people have said and different people we've looked at.
That the food was still in the belly that Mom made that night before. That was not digested completely. That's one of the other reasons why the original autopsy said that it was less than maybe 24 hours.
Yeah.
Ray, many eyewitnesses' accounts before finding the girls' bodies on January 1957 have many eyewitness accounts seen Barbara and Patricia many days after disappearance at many locations. Do you agree with the original autopsy of them finding the girls died less than 24 hours?
Yes.
You do believe in that?
Yeah, I believe that whatever happened, whether it picked up, I mean, I've got my own theory, but there's a lot of them out there. But the dinner that Barbara ate that night, Petey really didn't eat that much, because, in fact, she hardly ate at all. Unbeknownst to Mom, she had gone out earlier in the day with her little brother Jimmy, and they had banana splits. So they had ice cream before dinner. So she wasn't really hungry to begin with. And they did find peanuts in Patricia's system further along in the digestive tract. So that would line up from when she had a banana split earlier in the day with her brother, Jimmy. And she did have, peanuts on the top of that. Barbara had what she ate for dinner that night. So if she ate for dinner at 7:00 and the stuff was still in her stomach and hadn't gone through the rest of her digestive tract, then more than likely she died within 3 hours of eating her dinner. So that's why I believe that they died that night. At least the only one you can say for sure would be Barbara died within 3 hours of that night. And maybe Petey was killed later and dumped at a later time. But there are also theories that they were dumped and moved. Like initially the bodies were elsewhere, and then someone who didn't want bodies to be found on their property took the bodies and moved them to a different location.
Really?
Yeah, there was that theory, because Leonard Prescott actually was part of the family that owned Santa Fe Park. And so, one theory is that Leonard Prescott found the bodies in Santa Fe Park and said, oopsie, I don't want these bodies found in my family's area, so we're going to throw them in my car and we're going to dump a little further away. And then lo and behold, he's the one that found them. So he may have found them. I'm not saying he had anything to do with them being killed, although he was a suspect for a long time. They had done search warrants on his house for months after it happened. Because to be honest with you, I have a hard time with the Leonard Prescott finding the bodies theory based on how he said it happened, because I've driven that area back, before it was, they had the cement walkway they have now. And they had a guardrail there, just a guardrail. And to be driving on the right side, going eastbound, and being able to see bodies that were, if you'd seen the photograph, are pretty much already starting to go down the embankment from the other side of the road, moving at 35 miles an hour, isn't going to happen.
And the story about him going to get his wife, wouldn't you? Yeah. Even if you're suspicious a little bit, you would go straight to the authorities.
Well, no, I would go straight and see the bodies and then go, yeah, okay,
right.
They're bodies. And then I might say, okay, I'm going to go back to get my wife because I don't want to be the one to find them, and we'll pretend we found them together so that.
Exactly.
But yeah, if you see something like that, you're going to pull over, you're going to walk across the street, and you're going to be like, yeah, those aren't mannequins. Then he kind of said at one point that he had to relieve himself. So really he did stop the car, have to get out and, relieve himself in the woods. But the problem with that is normally you would, if you had really had to do it, and you'd go to the right-hand side. Why would you cross the road? Right. So that didn't make any sense either. So there was something going on there, and they kept saying in the coroner's inquest, did you touch the bodies? Did you touch the bodies? Did you touch the bodies? And he kept saying no, but they kept asking the same question. So for some reason, they think those bodies were moved. Now, I've seen photos taken of the lividity on the bodies when they finally took pictures and they rolled them over and they took photographs of the lividity on the bottom. It was fairly obvious that they died at that location because the lividity matched the location perfectly. The branches that were under them, the tilt in the bodies that they were found. So now the question that we've always had is, were they killed and then left there, or were they unconscious for some reason and they left there and then froze to death? Because if you're unconscious and you're out in the freezing it was 0 degrees that night. So that's really cold.
And no drugs or alcohol were found in the body.
No drugs or alcohol. No drugs or alcohol. So, yeah, I mean, they sent a lot of that out. The crime labs weren't like they are now. So some of them went to what they considered to be their crime labs. Some stuff went out to I believe it was one of the petroleum companies. I think it was in Whiting, Indiana, that had some sort of a lab. So they sent stuff there to see if maybe it was carbon monoxide poisoning or something like that, where they were, rendered unconscious from carbon monoxide, or even what is starter fluid. So if someone had ether, and used some starter fluid or something to knock them unconscious and then leave them on the. But yeah, they couldn't find any traces of any of that. So which he says, okay, well, the bottoms of their feet were clean, which means they didn't walk around. So let's say that there was an article in the paper that, said that it could have been a prank, that, someone took them out there as a joke, forced them out of the car naked while they were still, and then leave them there, as a joke to kind of, now see if you can get home naked or whatever, and it was called the prank article. Yeah. And but if that was the case, first of all,
the way that they were in the air, the way they were then.
Yeah. No, it's not like that. Yeah. The way they were found they weren't huddled together like they were freezing to death.
Right.
And they would have walked around a little bit just to stay warm. And then you're walking around in naked feet. Your feet would be dirty, all cut up from the branches or thorns or whatever else that you might be walking on. So yeah, that was out the window too.
Well, this takes us into our next chapter. The suspect.
Okay. So it's
such a long story, I know.
It is. Trust me, it took me. We were working on a documentary, and it took me like a week of 8 hours a day to bring a producer up to speed on where the case was. I've got binders upon binders.
Yeah. after actually the first time I ever listened to you about this, I just kept getting more and more into it, and there's so many stories upon stories, so many layers to this whole thing. It's unbelievable. Like we're not giving it enough justice.
No, you can't. Like I said, if you had a week-long podcast, we might be able to do it.
Maybe. So let's get into just the suspects, and after that, Michelle has a couple questions for you.
Sure. So the original suspect was Benny Bedwell, or Edward Benny. Benny was his nickname. And that's Leonard Prescott right there. Hey, Len. He doesn't look too happy being in the back of that police car, by the way. Of course, I don't know of too many people that are happy when they're in the back of a police car. But anyway, so that was Leonard. He's the guy that found the bodies. But Benny Bedwell, it was kind of interesting because one of the problems with this case is that I keep telling people it wasn't that there were no tips. It's just there were too many. It was like everybody and their brother saw the Grimes girls. You know, they were found as far away as Tennessee, supposedly. There was a woman who worked for the basically the unemployment agency in Tennessee, and they said that she had both the girls there trying to find jobs, while they were in Tennessee because they were going to try to visit Memphis and see Elvis at his home. So yeah, they were tracking down. I mean, there's so many. I think to this day that this is the largest number of man hours spent on a missing persons case at the time in history. So in Chicago history, at least. And so they had everybody working on this thing. Any of the local surrounding departments were working on it. And so lo and behold, it becomes Cook County's case. So now you have Sheriff Lohman in charge of the investigation. And of course, you've got Harry Gloss and Walter McCarran, who was the coroner. And within 2 days, Cook County has their guy. So, they're like, God's gift to law enforcement at this point. So what happened is that they got a tip from the owners of the D&L restaurant on Madison Street. And they said they had a part-time dishwasher named Benny Bedwell. And he was kind of slow, probably borderline, mentally retarded or whatnot.
Sure.
And they said that they recall, there's Benny. They recalled that that Benny was with another guy and two girls that they swore are the Grimes sisters. And so they're like, oh, let's pick up Benny. So they pick up Benny and they take him to a motel room in Cicero. And they interview him for 3 days in the motel room. Now you would think you would take him to the police department or something like that, but at the end of the 3 days, they come out with a typewritten confession that Benny signs. But thing is, Benny doesn't know how to read, and he doesn't know how to write. He can't write his name. So basically, they have their confession. They lock the guy up, and yeah, they're hoping it's case closed. But so this is before the autopsy's even done. So literally 2 days after the girls are found, they've got Benny Bedwell sitting in a motel room in Cicero. And the motel room was owned by a sheriff's deputy. So, and we've actually talked to some people who have relatives who were part of that interrogation crew. And they did say, yeah, they beat him pretty well, during this interrogation. So they also offered him money to confess. They said they'd give him money if he confessed. They'd say they told him they'd let him go if he just admitted to it. It could all be over. But anyway, so they got their guy. So he testifies not at the coroner's inquest, although it is so funny when you see. I mean, it was like a comedy, this coroner's inquest, because they actually brought Benny Bedwell into the coroner's inquest, which is like with his attorney. And I'm like, this isn't the trial. Like, this guy shouldn't even be there. And, they're just trying to determine cause of death. Why would you bring the suspect into the coroner's inquest? Beyond me, but it was like a circus. Mm-hmm. So Benny tells the story that him and this other guy, who ends up being, what was his name? William Willingham, is the guy who ends up being the mysterious second person that was at the D&L restaurant. He said that him and his buddy had taken the girls out, and they basically partied with him for a month. You know, they went to bars and danced and all of them. They danced with, you know, without shoes on, and, you know, made up this whole story, and then had sex voluntarily with them. They drank, they, you know, they partied up. Obviously, Benny was the only person supposedly didn't know that the entire country was looking for these two girls, you know, which didn't make any sense. If you knew, I mean, these two girls are what, you wouldn't be out, you know, in public with these two partying for 3 weeks. But anyway, that was a story. And then he said that one of them got angry and didn't want to have sex with the other one, and then his friend punched the one and then knocked her out, and then they had to kill them both or whatever. And so that was the story. And of course they did the whole news thing where the news circus, where they took Benny out to the site, and they actually laid a set of newspapers where the bodies were found, and the sheriff pointed at the newspapers, said, "That's where the bodies were found, right? You know, right there." And Benny's like, "Oh yeah, that's where the bodies were found. Yeah, right there." Yeah. And so basically the autopsy comes back, and when they said that they died within 3 hours of basically leaving the house that night, and there was no alcohol in their system and there were no drugs in their system, they basically, you know, Adamowski, who was the state's attorney, basically kicked the case and said, "Yeah, Benny's out of here." So that was the only person ever charged in the Grimes case since then. So,
right. All right, Michelle, you have a question?
So Loretta Grimes, the mother of Barbara and Patricia, received, I believe, 2 phone calls.
mhm.
And one of those phone calls being, I believe, the day after Bonnie Lee Scott was found.
The later one, yes.
Right. And where they think it might have been the killer calling her,
Right,
describing even the little one's crooked toe.
right.
Could you expand on that a little bit for us?
So back when I said originally, when I had told you that I'd contacted the Chicago cold case guys and kind of told them about what I thought, was because when I was researching the Grimes case, I was also just kind of doing a shotgun search for any other child murders that were going on at the time. And that's when I came across the name Charles Milquist. And I had never heard, you know, after doing like 6 months of research on the Grimes case, I had never heard of this guy, Charles Milquist. So I'm like, interesting. And it was about Bonnie Lee Scott. And basically it was a year after the girls were found. Charles Milquist had killed a 15-year-old girl by the name of Bonnie Lee Scott. And so I was reading about that case. There's Charles, and or Chuck. And so what happened is that Loretta Grimes, and this is, you know, it was actually published in the paper, so it wasn't just a story. It was published in the paper that Loretta Grimes received a phone call from one guy. She received a lot of phone calls, and some of them were pretty nasty, in letters and everything else. You know, phone calls with people saying your girls were, you know, this and that, and they shouldn't have been out that late, and it's your fault that you let them go, and you shouldn't ever let them go that and hang out that late, and blah blah blah. And so she gets this one phone call, and the guy says, and this made the paper because it was so horrible. The guy says, "I'm the one that undressed your girls," and this was shortly after the bodies were found. And he said, "I'm the one that undressed your girls, and I know something about the little one." And he's referring to Barbara, because Barbara was actually smaller than Patricia. And he said, I know something about the little one that nobody else knows. When she's nervous, she crosses her toes. And then he laughed, and then he hung up the phone. And now that was never made public about Barbara. And she did have that kind of habit. And so that's why it shocked her. And she said, "I will never forget that voice and the way he laughed." Well, once Bonnie Lee Scott's body was found, and this is, you know, a year later, when a little over a year, about a year and a half later, Bonnie Lee Scott's body is found in September of '58, and the police don't know who it is because the body had decomposed pretty badly by the time it was found, and so they had an idea it was female based on the hair, and they said that they thought it was, the article actually came out in the paper, and it said body found at 95th and LaGrange Road. And it said police believe it's that of a missing think it was a nurse or teacher or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but they said they believe it's a teacher or whatever in her 30s, that's been missing for a while.
Really?
Well, that day that the newspaper article came out, Loretta Grimes gets a phone call, and the guy says, "I got away with it again." And he said, "They're not going to be able to pin this on Benny Bedwell or Barry Cook." He was referring to the Judith Mae Anderson case. And then he laughed and hung up the phone. And she said for 100% sure it was the same person. So basically that's initially what made me think that Melquist could have been the person that did it, because first of all, who's looking at the paper as far as knowing
Right.
the body? They want to know when it was found. So they're going to be checking the paper constantly. Now the person sees the body's been found, and the police don't know who it is, and they think it's somebody else. So right away he's thinking, I got away with it, ego. So I'm gonna call my last victim and kind of taunt them again and say I'm getting away with this again. So it's the same. It could only be the killer of Bonnie Lee Scott that would have made that.
Right. And if you look at a map between where the Grimes sisters' bodies were found compared to where Bonnie Lee Scott was found, not too far from each other.
Oh no.
Between 95th and LaGrange to German Church Road, not that far at all from each other.
Exactly. And she was tossed just over the embankment, just naked, same way.
Right.
Of
Found
course,
by Boy Scouts, I believe. Was it a Boy Scout troop?
Cub Scouts from
Cub
Cicero.
Scouts.
So they were on a nature walk, and they actually some poor Cub Scouts. This is what nature walk. Hey, look what we found. But the difference being is that Bonnie Lee Scott's body was mutilated after death.
Was she decapitated?
She was decapitated, and her torso was stabbed. So he had stabbed the torso and then decapitated the head. His story was, when they finally got him to cop to the crime, he said, well, what happened is that after I'd killed her, I woke up the next morning and thought I had dreamed the whole thing. He said he couldn't believe that he would have actually done something like this. And this is before decapitation. This is when he said he suffocated her with a pillow. Keep that in mind, because suffocation at that point produced, light bruising, which they did find on the girls' faces. And they said they couldn't rule out suffocation as a cause of death. So that's how Bonnie Lee Scott actually died, based on Melquist's thing. And Melquist had this tendency, this habit, based on some past girlfriends that he had, that he would render you unconscious using a sleeper hold that he learned in the military.
Right.
In the military for a short time. So if you were a girlfriend of Melquist, typically you'd be hugging him, and the next thing you know, you'd be waking up on the floor and he'd be looking down at you. After that is when they would break up, and that was usually the end of the end of the relationship. So I don't blame them. But anyway, so that kind of stuck with me about the suffocation angle. And then so I kept saying, usually people who do this type of thing, if they're a serial killer and it wasn't, like a mob hit or something, they tend to get a little bit more bold as time goes on, or even a little bit more violent or a little bit more aggressive. And so if my thought was, and this goes back to the puncture wounds on Petey's chest. So let's say, in the case, if we just, for sake of argument, let's say Melquist was the killer. Let's say somehow he, and I've got theories about how that may have happened, but let's say he dumps the bodies, goes home, same type of MO, wakes up the next day, says, ooh, I don't know if I really did this. Obviously, he likes to return to the scene of the crime. That's kind of what he does. So he goes back. At this point, they're frozen solid. They've been sitting there, because it was a week later that he went back to the Bonnie Lee Scott site. So if he waited a week while the girls were on the side of the road at 0 degrees, they would have been frozen solid at that point. So with Bonnie, he said he had this urge. He said he was going to go there to bury it. He felt bad, so he wanted to bury the body. But instead of burying the body, he said, I had this overwhelming urge to just take a knife and stab her torso and then cut her head off and toss it into the woods. And that's basically what he did. So had he gone back to the Grimes sisters and tried to do that, he wouldn't have got the same satisfaction, because if you've ever tried to cut into like a frozen roast or something like that, you don't make puncture wounds too easily into a
Right.
frozen body. So I thought, well, maybe it was like he was using, and plus if it had snowed, so if he was looking for the bodies and they were covered with the light snow, which snow did fall after the girls were left there, which is part of the reason why their bodies probably weren't found as quickly as Bonnie Lee Scott's and the Schuessler Peterson when it was semi-warm out. So if he was using the three-pronged fork, which was found in the trunk of his car, when they arrested him for the Bonnie Lee Scott case, they found a garden fork with three prongs on it. If he had tried, smacking Petey with this garden fork, he would have left three impressions that wouldn't have gone in that deep. Right. So that could have been why they were only a half-inch deep, because they couldn't go any deeper than that. So that was another reason why Melquist kind of stood out for me.
All right. Now, I want to just bring into just a couple little things left, and then we'll call it a night. Mm-hmm. I want to point out, when I said in the beginning, the Peterson-Schuessler bodies were found naked mm-hmm. in a ditch, and like we've talked about before, near water. Mm-hmm. The Grimes sisters found naked in a ditch, basically near water. Now, Bonnie Lee Scott, mm-hmm. ditch as well, naked. Now, none of the clothes were ever found of any of these people, even though Charles Melquist said it was underneath his seat in his car. Right. But that was never ever found. Point out one other thing is, each one of these victims, or each one of these crimes, murders, there were markings to a body. There was the 14 slashes to the one Peterson boy. Mm-hmm. Then there was the 3 little marks that was on the little girl. Mm-hmm. And then there was a decapitation as well as a knife mark into Bonnie Lee Scott, if you want to say Loretta. And my thing is, you remember Son of Sam, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So he always said, well, it was further on in life, he talked about that it was a larger group of people that were doing these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Could it have been that Charles Melquist was part of the mob, the lower class mob?
He was.
Gangland. Kenneth Hansen was. Mm-hmm. Actually, technically, John Wayne Gacy.
Right. Well,
he was in his. Yeah. I mean, left field, left.
Right.
But the thing is could there be actually a group that was, in a sick way, teaching people how to do things, and a signature, naked bodies, no clothes, and some kind of markings on the body? Is this actually deeper than what we really think it is? Because we never really truly know the real killer.
No.
Could there be a larger group of these people that are out there, and maybe still to this day? Could that be something that could be happening? Well, and go ahead, Ray.
No, I was going to say that's definitely a possibility too, because you have to kind of leave yourself open to thinking of different possibilities, because where the girls were found was Willow Springs, basically, in a nutshell. It was close to Willow. I mean, they went to the Willow Springs Police Department. Technically, it was unincorporated Burr Ridge, but yeah, it was Willow Springs area. And during the 50s, Willow Springs was, if you wanted to do anything nasty, you went to Willow Springs. And everybody knew it. It wasn't a big secret. The police department was owned by the mob. They were
pulling bodies out of the water.
Yeah. There was a lot going on there. So everyone kind of knew about it. Now, interestingly enough, I kind of broadened, and believe me, we can get into, there was a group of teenagers at the time who I think were also involved with the Grimes case, but I think there was a link between Melquist and this group. And so, like I said, this could be a week-long podcast, but I do believe there's at least 3 people still alive who know what happened. Or I want to say there's 1 who was directly involved and 2 who know what happened.
So you're saying that there was 2 that were directly involved, that are still alive to this day, mm-hmm. and another one who has an idea of what happened. Am I correct on that?
I would say there's 2 that very possibly know exactly what happened that night, and one who was directly involved.
And it's been almost about 66 years.
And they all know each other. So these three people I'm talking about were part of the same group.
Right. And you use the word group.
Yeah.
I've always thought that way too. I've always thought it never was one person.
Well, one of the persons in the group, who I suspect had a lot to do with it, it's kind of a, well, it's not really that long of a story, but the person had bragged at the time that they were responsible for undressing them and getting them out of the car, but not directly responsible for the murder. He was questioned by police at the time because at the same time that the Grimes girls were supposed to be home from the movie, this group of guys, gang, if you want to call them that, a lot of them were like wannabe, gangsters that were starting to make their way into that realm, got into a fight at the same intersection where the girls were supposed to be coming home. And so basically it's kind of a long story, but two of the people in that group, one of whom is still alive, came forward about a month after the girls were missing to say that they had seen the Grimes girls. Of course, this is a month later, and they knew them. They knew the family. Uh-huh. And so they said that they were driving eastbound on 35th Street. So 35th and Sealy, you have Archer. Then at 35th Street is where the bus stop should have been. And then if you walk east from there, you have Sealy that comes in and catches up with 35th Street. Well, supposedly this car, which was, by the way, a 55 Buick Special hardtop, which would be the same car that Roger Menard seen trying to pick up girls walking down Archer Avenue, had two individuals in the car, one of whom still alive, who said that, they drove past two girls that looked like they were playing hide and seek on the north side of 35th Street, which would have been the opposite direction of where the girls lived. So they would have no reason to be on that side of the street if they were trying to get home. Plus, it was like 0 degrees out, and Petey had a very light jacket on. So the last thing they would be doing is playing outside when they were already late getting home, and they were late getting home the night before. So it didn't make any sense. But they said they went around the block to see who they were. And then when they went around the block, they came by, rolled their window down, looked, and they said, "Oh, those are the Grimes girls." Now, they knew the Grimes girls. So it wasn't as though, they could have mistaken them or something. So both of these individuals were talked to by the police. One of them sounded like he was basically coached before his interview, and that was the son of a Cook County Sheriff's deputy, a sergeant at the time, and the other one wasn't. So the other group of guys that got into the fight were driving a black 49 Mercury. And so, which is the other car that was seen in tandem trying to pick up the two girls walking behind Roger Menard. They got into a fight. The police are called to one of their houses where the fight is going on. The police come, they take everyone in, they find out, we're fighting because we were out picking up girls and we had sex with these girls in our car, and that's it. And that's what we're fighting about. Well, what it sounds like to me is that you're driving around in a very noticeable car. It's a very flashy, 55 Buick hardtop special, pretty new for the time, kind of a racing car. People talk, people know everyone in the neighborhood. If they see you anywhere near the Grimes girls, if someone were to see you, you better come up with an excuse why you happen to be driving around the block twice by the Grimes girls. So my thought is that they originally picked them up, not intending to harm them. I don't think that was their intention initially. I think it was just to go out and have some fun. One of them probably got upset and didn't want to. Probably Petey, she was a little younger, 13. And I think they got out of the car. And I think that the two cars kept circling to try to corral them. And of course, that would cause some commotion, and some screams were heard at that intersection about that time of two girls. Um, the guys fight because some want to go through with this, some don't. That's already been proven. Two of them jumped out of the car and ran into the bowling alley across the street. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. One of those guys is still alive. The one that was in the Buick hardtop is still alive. And then the guy that admitted to taking the girls out to German Church Road and forcing them out of the car, and then bragging about the fact that he just told the police what they wanted to hear. But he threatened this woman, who was a girl at the time, who was a friend of his. He said, if you tell anyone, you're the only one I've ever told, I'll kill you and your entire family. And so she kept it with her for her entire life until shortly before she died. And it was her daughter that came to me and said, yeah, this is the guy that said it. And it just so happens to be that this guy was friends with all of those other guys. They all kind of tied together. And I actually had a chance to interview one of them before I knew that he possibly could be one of the suspects. And that was a pretty interesting interview. I just knew him as the guy that may have been the last one to see the girls alive, because that made
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah.
Tonight has been a really cool interview, Ray, and I really do appreciate you coming on, man. You are definitely a book of knowledge on things.
Yeah.
You don't know the half of it. I mean,
No, this is just the start.
But you know what? Before we go off, I like to leave it like this: is that for those people that you're like talking about, you know, they might be listening or watching a lot of the things that you do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's actually, as you're getting long in the tooth, because it's been 66 years for the people who are listening, is that it's time to confess, because eventually you're going to meet your maker, and no matter what, you're going to have to tell the truth. And I would alleviate just a little bit of the problem by at least confessing. So when you do meet your maker, at least you gave some truth. So I'm going to leave that with you. For whoever is these people that Ray is talking about, it's time to confess. It's time to tell the truth, because eventually your Lord will know. Ray, once again, thanks for coming on. Do you have anything that you'd like to plug?
Nothing. I mean, we do have a podcast that we call. I'm doing it with a friend of mine who's in New York, and we call it Murder and Mixology. It's not a video podcast; it's just audio. But people can get that on whatever they get podcasts on, Spotify or Pandora or any of the wherever you get your podcasts from, you can find it. It's called Murder and Mixology. And the first season we're doing is just on the Grimes case, you know, because it's kind of like my thing right now, but we're looking to branch off after that. But so we kind of look at each case. You know, we do a drink beforehand, you know, that's based on whatever topic we're talking about that week, you know, that relates to the case. And
that's
then,
what our pretense was in the beginning, because it's called Spirits by the Graveside. Like, before I stopped drinking, like,
yeah. So, but that's fun. And so I think we've got 3 episodes out there now. We're working on the 4th. COVID kind of threw a wrench into that, because my friend got COVID first, and that put it off for like a month, and then I ended up getting it, and so that pushed it off again. But hopefully we'll be getting started on that soon, and probably have another 3 or 4 episodes. I mean, like I said, there's so many twists and turns. The mob's involved in this case, not directly, as though I think it's a mob hit, but there were the lead investigator that took over for the Grimes case was a narcotics investigator. And he was on the take with Sam Giancana. And so he was working for Sam Giancana. He went to prison for protecting drug dealers that were working for Sam Giancana, but he was also the lead investigator for Chicago on the Grimes case. Charles Melquist worked for Sam Giancana. Charles Melquist's job was to infiltrate groups of young people to find out who was selling dope and then get rid of the competition. So, and he would turn over to Sheldon Teller was the cop's name. He would just turn over to Teller everything that he knew about Giancana's competition, and then Teller would make the arrests and be like super cop. So there was a lot of that going on. There was the fact that Daley There was a political side of this too, because with the case of the Schuessler-Peterson boys, that was Cook County. With the case of Judith May Anderson, that was Cook County. With the case of the Grimes sisters, it was Cook County. Daley, at the time, Daley had only been mayor since 1955, but he was also the leader of the Democratic Party. He hated Lohman with a passion, the sheriff, because the sheriff had his eyes on the governor's mansion. And while Lohman was technically a Democrat, Daley didn't believe it. He thought he was a Republican in sheep's clothing. So they had a very public hatred toward one another. And when I was talking to the kids of some of the lead investigators, they said that the word was put out at the highest level, and you could take for what that meant, that nobody was going to get any medals for solving any of these cases, because if they did, Lohman would look like a hero and it'd be a shoo-in for the governorship. So there's a lot of that going on too. So
a lot of behind the scenes things, I'll tell you. Well, once again, Ray, thanks for coming on, man. Like you said, this would take a week long, maybe a month long.
It's never ending.
I
just hope it's solved. I just hope it, it'll be DNA or a deathbed confession. Really
real quick before we leave. If anybody does have any tips, who would they contact regarding any of these cases?
What they should do is it's still an open case until the murder is solved. It's always open. So if anybody has any information, I always encourage them to go to the Cook County Sheriff's Department tip line. So they do take that. I mean, some people are nervous about going to the police. That's why a lot of people contact me. They always say, "Oh, I was afraid to talk to the police." And what I have to say probably isn't that important. Is usually how it goes, but it usually.
But you could do it anonymously
yeah,
too.
Anonymously, yeah.
Right.
But the key is that we just need these people talked, and I don't think that any of these people that are still alive intentionally meant to murder these girls. So if they are listening out there, I don't, it's a horrible thing. But I believe the person who was primarily responsible was Melquist, who is now deceased. But I think these kids were kind of involved with him in a way. We have a witness, the next door neighbor, who's very close to the girls, who remember seeing Melquist in the house the day that they went to the theater. So, they said he was talking to one of the brothers, Joey or whatnot. But who knows? I mean, it was 60 years later. But there was some link between the two. I think Melquist did the old passy outy thing that he would do, and I think one of them freaked out and thought they were dead, and then he ends up, knocking the other one out and throwing him out of the car. And generally, the naked thing is that people used to think that you can get fingerprints during this time period. A lot of the bodies were left naked, no matter what the murder was, because the criminals thought at that point you could get fingerprints off clothes.
Get rid of the evidence.
Yeah, just get rid of everything. So a lot of the pictures I've seen, and I've seen a lot of Harry Glossus stuff, almost all the bodies were naked.
Really?
So
wow.
That was just one of the things that they did. So.
All right. Well, once again, Ray, thanks for coming on. I invited you out for Parapalooza. I hope they up on invitation.
I have to look back. I'll look at that and make sure I'm not in Michigan at the time.
Yeah.
And then sounds good.
All right. And that's Michelle Ward, my co-host, and I'm Neal. And as always, boys and girls, boo.
Boo.
All right. Take care.